Call to order the December 6th, 2017 meeting of the Oklahoma Aeronautics Commission. Would note that we complied with the Open Meeting Act, filing of the meeting notice and posting of the agenda as required. Roll call and recording of members present. Jane?
Chairman Stuckey,
Present.
Vice Chair Conway,
Here.
Secretary Potter,
Here.
Commissioner Putnam,
Here.
Commissioner Amos,
Here.
Commissioner Hunter,
Present.
Commissioner Ray.
Present.
We have a quorum. Item number 3 is the approval of the October 4 commission meeting.
Move to approve. Second.
We have a motion and second. Any questions? Call the roll, please.
Vice Chair Conway,
Aye.
Secretary Potter,
Aye.
Commissioner Putnam,
Aye.
Commissioner Amos,
Aye.
Commissioner Hunter,
Aye.
Commissioner Ray,
Aye.
Chairman Stuckey.
Aye. So ordered. And I'd like to acknowledge and welcome the Department Director, Patterson. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Item 4 is Director Report. Vic?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Secretary Patterson, glad you could join us. And I'd like to special recognition we have with us today in the audience, newly elected in the special election, somewhat newly elected, Senator Paul Racino from District 45, a 25-year veteran of the Navy, and I think got out as a Master Chief Petty Officer, and 10 years at Tinker. We do have a naval component in the state of Oklahoma. It goes with our we have the most shoreline. I think you know that, Mr. Chairman, but glad to have you, Senator. Glad to announce I've visited with a number of you about this, and Secretary Patterson, I've visited with him about this. The 2018 convention of the National Association of State Aviation Officials is going to be here in Oklahoma City. That will be September 22nd through the 26th. So it's a big deal. It's going to be, all signs are, it'll be at the Skirvin, will be the conference hotel. That'll bring in between 300 and 350 people to downtown Oklahoma City for our annual convention and trade show, and probably, I'd say, in excess of 40 of my colleagues from around the country. So it's really a shining moment from us, for us. It's a great thing for our national convention to be here. This will be the second time it's been in Oklahoma. It was in Tulsa in 1997, and so 20 years later in Oklahoma City. And I think we'll have a lot of good things to show off about Oklahoma, and an excellent economic impact study about how important aviation and aerospace is here to share with my colleagues and other friends attending that as well. The NORDAM had a news conference and ceremony last month to announce that it was entering into a joint venture with China Airlines for the MRO, which will be called NORDAM Asia Limited, which will do MRO work on the structural aircraft components for China Airlines. Lufthansa doubled its floor shop area up at Tulsa International to 115,000 square feet as it opened up a new component shop. That they also had a tour and a rather big rollout of that announcement. And then, but I'm going to say it, and I don't think I'll get prosecuted for an Open Meeting Act violation. But good news about American, it moved some additional work, engine work on the CFM 56-5B to the Tulsa maintenance base. That came from a U.S. Air shop. I can't remember exactly where that was, but it's been, American has really worked hard on the integration of its MRO processes and its fleets after the merger of U.S. Air, and here's a benefit for our Tulsa maintenance base. That concludes keeping my report rather short because of wanting to share with you a rather detailed presentation on the economic impact study. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Vic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Financial report. Jane?
Good morning, Secretary Patterson, Chairman and Commissioners. In your packet, behind item number 5, you'll find the 2018 financial information, and the numbers are based on October 31st, because obviously I couldn't get November yet. As of the October 31st, the commission had an ending cash balance of 5.1 with 4.4 million encumbered. We also have still have the additional 1.3 million, which is pre-encumbered funds that are still remainders of the FY17 capital projects that haven't been granted yet. Our statutory collections for the month of September totaled $33,884. October looks a lot better at $548,020. Statutory revenues collected July 1st through October 31st is $1,557,990 compared to $1,745,799 for the same time frame last year. As of October 31st, the Commission's FY18 total year-to-date expenditures are $1,572,334. And also, I had sent an email to all of you about the meeting I'd gone to at Risk Management, and that information is in the front of your packet as well. I've emailed it to you and everything, but if you have any questions about it, please let me know, and I will give you an answer, or I'll get the answer for you, whichever's needed. And I guess that's all I have, if you have any questions for me.
Let me ask a question, Mr. Chairman, of Jane. Jane, but we've got a third of the year in. Would you have any feel yet, or does it look fairly certain that, again, we'll probably exceed the cap placed upon our largest source of revenue, the aircraft excise tax? And that cap is $4.5 million. Last year, $1.2 million went to the general revenue fund last fiscal year. What would you be able to project at this point?
I wouldn't have an actual number. I would think, based on what we've seen, that it will probably exceed again. Of course, last month was really low, or the month of September was really, really low, and this month we're not too far into it, but it's not great yet, so.
We do still have our bill pending to raise that cap to 6 million, correct, Sandra? 6 million. Senate Bill 705? Yeah, and that's kind of right there at the finish line, but it's gotten kind of clogged up. We need some Drano. I don't know what the Drano would be, but we've kind of run into some problems. I think that has to do with the budget problems.
Any other questions? Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Okay, item 6, Aviation Economic Impact Study. Grayson?
Hey, good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing this morning?
Good.
As we reported at the last meeting, we were going to bring in our talent, our expert for the project, Barb Fritchie from Aviation. She's going to come give about an hour presentation on the economic impact study. In your packet, there should be a notes page. You can follow along using that. There's also a bound packet, which is kind of the methodology guide if you're wanting to really dig into the methodology of the study. But follow along on the packet. We'll have it on the presentations up here. But without further ado, let me introduce Barb to come to the podium. And I believe, Sandra, we are going to record this in case people aren't here. We can replay it and make a movie of it.
Wonderful. Good morning. Some of you I've met over the course of the last year or so while have been working on this study. Appreciate your time this morning. I'd first of all like to compliment your staff. I have been doing this for quite a while. I won't tell you how many years because it makes me feel really, really old, older than I even am. And they have been really, truly one of the most cooperative and responsive and just, great to work with people that we've ever had. For those of you that were in attendance back in the summer when the governor was on hand to roll out the study and to talk about the results, that is literally the most people I have ever, in all the years that I've done this, come to see a presentation about aviation. And that's a credit to you guys for getting the word out and contacting the right people who had an interest in this report. So thank you to all of you. And Hope we'll get to work together again in the not-too-distant future. For those and I know you guys have already seen the results of this study. What we really want to talk about a little bit more this morning is how did we get them? Because you may get questions on this, and we want you to be an informed champion for this work so that you can at least intelligently discuss what the results really mean. The study showed that aviation and aerospace in Oklahoma is contributing on an annual basis about $44 billion to the state economy. That makes aviation and aerospace, I think, the second largest industry in the state, which is great news. But we need to, understand what that number means, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit this morning. We don't want somebody to come up to you and you look like the guy on the screen here when they say, where do those numbers come from? And you go, yeah, God, I don't really know what that means or where they came from. And so we want to give you just basic information. We're not trying to turn you into Harvard economists this morning, but give you basic information about how we got the results, how we did the research, and how the numbers were built from the bottom up, so that, when somebody asks you, how are there 205,000 jobs associated with aviation and aerospace in the state of Oklahoma, you'll be able to give them an informed answer to that question. When we talk about the $44 billion that aviation and aerospace contribute to the state's economy, it's really important to understand that doesn't come just from the 109 airports that you all are the commission for. It comes from military aviation in the state of Oklahoma, and it also comes from aviation and aerospace businesses in the state, like Nordim, that are not based at one of the airports. Oklahoma, since World War II, has been a magnet for aviation and aerospace companies to come and locate here. You have one of the top aerospace industries in the country. And as Vic just pointed out, it's growing all the time. And we measured that as part of this study. One thing that's important, too, for you to realize about the study is it is a snapshot. It represents conditions that existed at the time that we did the study. And he's already announced this morning you've got the 2 or 3 things that are going to be growing beyond what we already measured. So as long as you continue to have a healthy airport system and aviation and aerospace continues to grow and you don't have any base closures, this number should stay strong and be something that contributes to the economy on a year after year basis. But that little pie chart shows you that the military does contribute to that $44 billion number. They're the biggest contributors, followed by the off-airport aviation and aerospace businesses that we measured in the study, and then finally the 109 commercial and general aviation airports. The military contributes about $19.3 billion to that $44 billion impact that we measured in the study. The Oklahoma Department of Commerce was a partner with us on this study, and they actually helped us to measure the impacts of the military. They had done that a few years prior, so this was really an update to information that they had done in another independent study where they looked at the economic impact of the military, aviation-related military in the state of Oklahoma. The impacts that are shown in the study represent impacts for Altus, Tinker, and Vance. And then also you have a couple of units of National Guard that are in the state that are not based at an airport. So we also included their impacts in the military portion of the study. When we examine the military impacts that are reflected in the report, it considers 2 different things that are going on. One, it considers the day-to-day operation of each base, just what they have to spend, the number of people that they're employing, the payroll, so on and so forth. But it also includes capital investment. If they've extended their runways, if they've built new facilities, that money, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk more about methodology that we used, that money that gets spent at all of the bases around the state or at the National Guard, because they had expenditures also, that money, while it's being spent, employs people, their salary, and so on and so forth. So we count not only the benefits that come from the day-to-day operation of the bases, but also benefits that are associated with capital spending or capital investment that has occurred. If you guys have any questions, please, feel free to jump in, because I'm hoping I'm not going to drone on like this for an hour, because you'll all be asleep probably. So please, if you do have questions about any of it, please, don't be hesitant to jump in. So these are the impacts for the military broken out by the Guard, Vance, Tinker, and Altus. I think I'm correct in saying that Tinker is the largest single-site employer in the state of any industry or business that you have, with almost 57,000 employees that are employed or that have jobs as a result of the base and its operations. So when we look at the military, over 72,000 jobs, annual payroll that's over 4.7 billion, and total annual economic activity that's estimated at $14.7 billion each year. So we'll talk a little bit more about what those numbers mean as we get into the methodology. Another thing that we looked at in this study, which isn't always considered in a statewide economic impact study, but this one was a much larger look at not just airports, but aviation and aerospace in the state of Oklahoma. We identified all of the businesses in the state not located on one of the airports, and there are many, that their primary or their core business relates to aviation or aerospace activities. Statewide, and again, this was a portion of the study that the Department of Commerce helped us with, they identified over 837 different businesses around Oklahoma that are not located at an airport that have aviation or aerospace as their core business. 307 of those are in the Oklahoma City metro area, and another 286 are in the Tulsa area. The rest of them are scattered at various locations around the state. But these businesses have a tremendous impact on the state's economy. Is there any way we can fix that so that that doesn't get cut off on the bottom, or probably not?
I'm wondering what's going on with your slides.
Yeah, the spacing was a little weird. I wonder if this is another one of those
And I'm so
PowerPoint
sorry.
things. That's okay.
I think, Barb, that your slides were adjusted to 16.9, which is the last
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
and they were probably made not in 6.9.
Okay, well, hopefully this will be the worst of it. That's okay, it's all right. I just hope the pie charts don't go wacky on us again. We have found that the version of PowerPoint that our graphics people work in and you guys try to present in sometimes are not always very conducive to one another. So if we have weird things that show up, that's the reason for that, and I apologize. So these are the impacts that are associated with the off-airport aviation and aerospace employers in the state, almost 60,000 jobs. One of the things, and we'll talk about this more as we go through the methodology, if you can look at that particular slide, all of the impacts and all of the categories that we talk about really are assembled in a two-step process. We first, through surveys, interviews, any way that we can beat the numbers out of people, we put together what we call our direct impacts. And those are always things that we can count, we can measure, we can somehow quantify and prove to somebody that there are this many jobs or, this many visitors or something that we're basing our economic impacts on. Once we have all those direct impacts assembled, then we go through an economic impact modeling process whereby we estimate indirect and induced impacts. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in a little bit. But it's just important to realize that when we drop down to these bottom lines and we're talking about the total, it's both the direct and then that, if you've ever looked at or heard about economic impact studies, the multiplier effect. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But these big numbers that we're talking about, that $44 billion number, that's the direct plus the additional benefit that you get from this spinoff or the multiplier effect from those direct impacts entering into the state's economy. So aside from, and these are the impacts that you guys are probably most interested in, aside from the impacts that come from the military aviation function in the state and from the aviation and aerospace related businesses, the general aviation and the commercial airports contribute about $10.6 billion to the state of Oklahoma on an annual basis. That's just a little more than they're getting to operate on in terms of what they're given out of the state budget. So maybe the Drano, Vic, is this number. When you start to explain that, hey, we're making an economic contribution that's $10.6 million each year, you know, maybe we could use a little bit more help to make sure that that investment stays healthy. For the airports themselves, we look at 5 different contributors to build up each airport's estimate of economic impact. One comes from the management of the airports, people that are at the airport on a day-to-day basis, making sure it's run, the lights are on, so on and so forth. Then we have aviation-related tenants. These could be people like fixed-base operators, aerial applicators, big airports, airlines. You have some of the biggest airline tenants in the country with the Mike Maroney School and the American MRO at your 2 commercial airports. Those are huge employers. There are very few airports where we're whoa, that's okay. I thought, oh boy, what did I do? We're doing a similar study that we're just finishing right now for Charleston, South Carolina, and Boeing, of course, is located at their facility. That's the only employer that I've ever found at an airport that's any bigger than the ones that you have. So you're definitely in the top 5 in terms of your aviation-related tenants and their sizes with those 2 major employers. When we do the tenant impacts, those are restricted to companies that are on airports that are aviation-related. You do have some instances where you have non-aviation tenants at some of the airports, and if we did not include their employment or their spending or any other of their activities in these studies strictly related to aviation-type tenants. Capital investment, and I mentioned that briefly when we talked about the impacts of the military, is another important annual source of economic contribution, and we'll spend a minute talking a little bit more about how we calculate that. General aviation visitors, all of the airports, even the commercial airports, have people that fly in on general aviation planes. These can be very small single-engine planes that maybe only bring in 1 visitor, charter planes that fly like the Thunder and the teams that come to play them. They fall into the general aviation category since they're not scheduled commercial flights. So sometimes those general aviation planes and the visitors that they bring are, they're really small planes. The guy might come in. He may not even leave the airport. He may have a meeting there, get back in his plane, and fly away. Other times they come and they stay for, several days and spend a lot of money. So we captured all of that as part of the study. And then the commercial visitor spending. When people fly on a commercial, or a person comes to Oklahoma on a commercial airline flight, according to surveys that we did for this study, they almost always spend at least 1 night in the state. And there's a tremendous $2.2 billion worth of economic impact that's associated with the spending that those visitors do or have while they're in the state for hotels, rental cars, food, entertainment, retail spending that they do, and that cycles throughout the state's economy. So let's talk a little bit about how we actually, now that we know what those 5 buckets of impacts were, how do we actually go about measuring them? If you'll notice from the slides that we've talked about before, everything is quantified using 4 measures. Employment or jobs, pretty straightforward. The annual payroll that's associated with those jobs. The spending that's associated with the entity. Take just a second to talk about that. So in the case of an airport, each year they have an operating budget. What does it cost to run the facility? What do we pay for insurance? What do we pay for lights? What do we pay to, have the grass mowed? Any kind of routine maintenance that goes on. If you're a company or you're a tenant at one of the airports, you may be buying other kinds of heavy parts and goods and services to run your business. So all of that spending is another factor that we collect and quantify as part of the study. And then when you add together the payroll and the spending, because that's the money that's really being infused on 2 different ways, one through payroll and one through business-related spending, that's the total annual economic activity that is reported in the study. So that $44 billion number that we throw around, and I'm sure you guys will, use periodically over the next couple years, that's the annual economic activity that we measured for those three components, the military, the airports, and the off-airport business. And that 44 billion is both spending and payroll added together. So those are two kind of important things to remember as you go through the process. So when we do the study, as I said, we start in each of the categories with everybody that's going to be measured. We start by collecting the direct impacts, that's everything we can measure, related to jobs, payroll, spending. And then, of course, the economic activity is just a sum of the payroll and the spending. So we're really not collecting that. That's a product of what we collect in those other two categories. And we collect all of that information through site visits, telephone interviews, paper surveys, online surveys. In the case of your study, we did passenger intercept surveys at the Tulsa airport to get information from the visitors. And so we use every, method practically available to collect this data. This was one of the parts of the study that we really had to rely on Grayson and your staff, because we don't always get, if you can imagine that, everybody to provide everything that they need. So sometimes, after multiple times, if we can't get an airport to provide us with data, we did one of two things. Either we worked with the staff who are most familiar with the airports to fill in whatever blanks we had, or luckily, because we had the Department of Commerce as one of our team members, they have access to secret information because they're a state government agency that we as a private consultant cannot get at. So they were able to fill in a lot of the missing blanks, especially on payroll and capital spending and other types of spendings for some of these visits. So I think that, in the end, we had a pretty complete estimate of all of our direct impacts. And then once we have all of those, then we go through our economic impact modeling process. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but that process that we go through once we have all the direct impacts, they go into a model. There are several different kinds of models that you can use for studies like this. The one that we chose is a model called IMPLAN. It's the model that the Department of Commerce uses for other economic impact studies that they do in the state. So, we're kind of comparing apples to apples. Like, I know while they were working with us on this study, they were doing one for toll roads or something like that in the state also. So they were using that IMPLAN model for that. But the reason that we prefer to work with IMPLAN is because it's actually owned by a private company that's based in North Carolina. And they keep all the data that's in the model, because you need the inputs that you need to have one of these models. There's hundreds and hundreds of data sources that you have to that's in the background of how the model functions. And they keep all of that data really up to date and current. The other models are all maintained by the federal government, and the data that's in those models tends to lag at least 3 years behind what's in plan, so they're just not as current. They're not bad, and they're a lot cheaper, but they're just not, we don't feel that they're quite as good, so that's why we use IMPLAN. And then IMPLAN allows us to figure out in the process that once that direct money or that direct job or whatever it is that we're measuring, once that hits the economy, how does it continue to multiply or expand? It doesn't go on forever and ever. I mean, eventually it leaks outside the area that we're studying and dwindles down to nothing. So it's not a cycle that goes on and I can't even say that word. Thank you there,
They
Mr.
teach us that
Director.
in law school.
There you go. I
2
couldn't
years.
get my lips to do that this morning. So anyway, it doesn't go on forever, and we'll talk a little bit more about what some of the typical multipliers that we used in the study look like. But then, so we add together then our direct impacts, those indirect and induced impacts that we get from the model to get our total impacts. And some of those big numbers that we've talked about this morning, the $19.3 billion that's associated with the military, and the 10.6 that's associated with the airports, and the 44 billion statewide. Those numbers represent both direct and indirect numbers that come from that multiplier effect. So that's something that's just important for you to know. In terms of airport management, I don't know how many of you have or ever will look at the technical report for the study. But we tried to make things as transparent as we could in the report so that people could actually, trace the numbers through the process and have confidence that what was being represented was realistic for each of the individual airports. So for airport management, we visited, 58, I think, of the largest airports in the state, certainly all the commercial airports and the larger GA airports. The rest of the airports, we gathered information from them, either on the phone, usually on the phone, or through surveys that they filled out. So every airport did provide data. Some just didn't provide quite as much good data as others. But if you look at the report and you look at a particular airport that you might be familiar with, and it says they have 3 employees, let's just say, and you say, there are not 3 people that work at the airport. Well, in the case of this study, we counted not just the people who work at the airport, but there are city and county people who do grants administration, legal, financial, all kinds of other things for the airport. Now, they're not a full-time job. They don't do that for the airport all day long, but part of their job in the municipality is supported by the airport. So our study considers both jobs that are on the airport and potentially off the airport that are actually involved in that airport administrative function. Some of your airports are run by fixed base operators, FBOs, so their impacts get reported in the tenant category. So if you look at an airport and it has a 0 for management, you would say, well, so-and-so manages that airport. Well, if they're an FBO, if they're a tenant there, their impacts got counted in another category. We also have several airports in Oklahoma where people run the airport, but they're an unpaid volunteer. So if they're running the airport kind of as a hobby, which we have instances of those, but they're not paid, their job was not included in this because it's actually not generating any kind of an additional benefit for the state in terms of its economy. It's a benefit for sure, but it's not an economic benefit. So for the airport management category, when we consider both the direct information that we collected and then this indirect and induced effect, there are about 840 jobs statewide that are related to the airport management function. And the airport's management function contributes about $134 million each year in economic activity, and that's a function of their spending to run the airport and then their payroll that they have for those 840 jobs. Tenant impact. For this study, many of the tenants were visited in person. As I said, the Department of Commerce helped us immensely on this because they were able to fill in blanks on a lot of these tenants if we were not able to get data directly from them. You have some really, really large tenants at your airports, and then we've got instances where a tenant may only have really one person or even kind of sometimes a half a job that is supported by their operation. Again, we only included in this particular category people or businesses if they were aviation related. If they were manufacturing buses, they didn't get counted. So just so you know that there are tenants that are at some of your airports that were not included because they're not aviation related. Also, any tenants that are outside the fence of the airport, even though they might be right next to it, they get counted in that off-airport aviation business and aerospace category that we included in the study. But on the airports, there are about 442 different aviation businesses around the state, and for direct employment, that was recorded at about 21,710 jobs. And again, that's the snapshot of when we did this, and this number changes all the time. So the impact from tenants, about 46,500 jobs and $7.6 billion in annual economic activity. So the tenants are a big driver of the economic impact that's associated with the airports. Yes, sir.
The 442 on-airport
Yes.
aviation, these are just aviation-related tenants.
That's correct.
The study did not include, and I understand why it's difficult to include it, the number of tenants on airports that are non-aviation related that located there because of the infrastructure in the aviation.
If they're not using the airfield or they're not producing an aviation-related product per se. They
Right.
were not included.
But I think it's important to recognize
Right.
that we have significant economic impact and development on airports as a result of that infrastructure, even though the company that's located there may not be in
Right,
aviation.
Right.
So that's another benefit of airport development.
Right. Airports are huge, and I was talking with Grayson about this last night. They're huge economic development tools. And the fact that you have all these airports and they have, provide air access to any place in the country and oftentimes the world, depending upon the runway length that they have. That's, when a company decides, that they're gonna expand or they're gonna locate, they have a little checklist that they go through. And airport's not usually number one, but it's usually in that top 3 to 5 things that they look at. And if you don't have the airport and it's not a good airport, you don't even make the cut to get looked at in terms of a community where that benefit is gonna go, so, or that company is gonna develop. So yes, they really, they wear 2 hats, the airports do. They themselves are huge economic generators, as these numbers show, but they also are key to the infrastructure that's needed for the state to attract other kinds of businesses into your state that would rely on aviation. And we actually measured that a little bit, and we'll talk about that in one of the last slides that we have. But that's an excellent point. I appreciate you bringing it up. But, we try to do these studies so that, because that's, that's the first thing they want to know. How do we compare to the other states? Well, Rhode Island only has 11 airports, so we can't really, compare your 109 to their 11, and it gets pretty tough to compare state to state in terms of these economic impacts, but we do try to do them, equally by state. So, the fact that we don't count non-aviation businesses is pretty typical to a study like this.
Let me, Barb,
yeah.
just a moment there, I think, Mr. Chairman, you're probably like the bus manufacturer that's on Tulsa International. I argued with them about this.
Yes, he
quite a
did.
bit, because it's on the airport proper. So, I mean, their revenues, they're paying for, has to stay at the airport. I probably got hung up on that a great deal, but I do understand it's not aeronautical activity. But obviously, American, Spirit Aerosystems, Lufthansa Technique that I just mentioned, BizJet, all those are on airport at Tull. Your own background, of course, I forget but I know it's part of the industrial air park, but East Jordan, Dollar General, they may be on the ALP actually. And I think, of course, they're utilizing the airport to get in and out of their facility at Ardmore, Oklahoma.
Well, but secondly, the infrastructure that was developed on the airport was sufficient to meet the infrastructure needs of those non-aviation companies.
And we actually have a number, which is like, it's either in the last slide or I think it's in the second to the last slide. So as part of the study, we actually then also identified and estimated the number of jobs statewide that are reliant in some way. I mean, they're not 100% supported by aviation, but they're companies that have sales forces that fly, or they have customers or suppliers that fly in to see them, or the bus company that even they're not aviation related per se, they benefit and rely on aviation. So we actually have that number. We don't have it by airport. It's a statewide number, but we'll share that with you also. So go back to the capital investment thing. This is a little bit harder for people to sort of like understand how we come up with this number, because they may drive by an airport and there's nothing being built, and they're gonna look at the report and they're gonna see 4 jobs and $200,000 of payroll and $300,000 of spending, and they're gonna say, there's nothing being built at the airport. Why is this in there? Well, what we do in a study like this, and that's true because airports don't do, big airports do projects all the time. Little airports, not so much. So what we do in a study like this is we use a 5-year history of the spending, of the average, the capital grants that have gone to an airport, the capital investment that they've done, whether it was the airport related or tenant related, because we have a lot of tenants that build hangars and buildings at the airports themselves. So we have that 5-year history. We turn it into average annual capital investment for each airport. And let's just say that number is, I don't know, $200,000. So then, once we know what that average annual spending is, that's our direct spending for that in that category. The in-plan model that we use in the process has ratios in it that tell us how many jobs were supported by that spending and what the typical payroll, given the type of job in the construction industry or engineering or whatever it would have been, what the typical payroll for that job would have been. So in the case of both visitors and capital spending, we don't start with the jobs, the payroll, and the spending. We start with the spending, and then we have to work backwards to get the jobs and the payroll that are associated with them. So it's a little bit different approach, but we feel like it's a valid economic impact that's associated with the airports, because these are projects they're doing. There's money that's being spent, and while that money is being spent, somebody's working and somebody's getting paid, and it's a result of what's going on at the airport. So that's what's shown in that capital investment category. So if somebody would question you on, well, I don't know, pick an airport, any airport, small, and they drive by and they don't see anything being built at that particular point in time, that could very well be true. But within that 5-year window that we looked at, they did some kind of a project that was big enough to register on the scale for economic impact. If they spent $80,000, that doesn't support a job. It's more like in the $120,000 range that you have to have in direct spending before it generates or supports at least one job. So even if they're doing small projects, it may not kick into, supporting a job. So they've got to at least meet a certain threshold before that happens in the process that we use. So those are the capital investment impacts statewide, about another 2,260 jobs that are supported. And this, again, is an average annual number for all the projects that are done at all the airports around the state. Then, as we talked about briefly in the beginning, we have impacts that are related to spending from visitors who come to the state by air.
Let me, Barb, excuse me.
Sure.
Let me back up a second. Did we include in that military construction? Like
Yes.
the Vance?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, we included in their 19.3.
Because that's a biggie. They're just
That's right.
rebuilding the runway.
That's right. All of their, same kind of thing. Although I think they were only able to provide the past 2 years. You had your grants for 5. I think they could only give us 2 years of data. But whatever they had constructed or rehabbed or, whatever they've done at Vance, Tinker, and Aldous, and the Guard, because they actually had some pretty large projects, the economic impact related to that construction at the bases was also included in that $19.3 billion impact that they had.
You're gonna have to forgive Barb. She speaks English properly, so it's Altus, and she even says Sin, Durant. She doesn't say Durant. Sorry, Commissioner Conway.
How am I supposed to
But
say
we're
it?
trying to help her.
How am I supposed to say Aldous? Tell me, I'm sorry.
Altus.
Altus.
It's
That's
like
like
Al,
in
just
Georgia.
think of Al.
Houston is Houston, and somebody else. I'm sorry. That's terrible.
There's no Villes down south.
And I've always. Why haven't you corrected me on that before? You
Because
just
I thought-
let me
we
go
like
on
it.
blindly doing
We
it
like
wrong. Well, you know what I was talking about. Sorry if I offended anyone. I didn't mean to do that. Okay, so general aviation visitors. There's no source that tells us how many visitors come to a general aviation airport each year. In fact, at the non-towered airports, we don't even really know how many planes come and go at these airports each year. So the process to estimate general aviation visitors is pretty much of an art rather than an exact science. So in this study, what we did was we started with each airport, and amazingly, this is one thing that they're pretty good about telling us. Whether they get it exactly right is, a little bit up to debate sometimes. But asking them on a weekly basis, not for the whole year, because that would go off the deep end. But if we ask them each week, how many aircraft come to your airport that are really visitors, not your based aircraft flying in and out, but somebody who came from somewhere else to your airport. So we started with those estimates at each airport, and in addition to asking them how many people planes came each week, we asked them, was the general mix, jet, twin, single. and how many people, visitors, were typically arriving on each aircraft. And I think we had probably at least 85% of the airports that provided us with that data. So we started with that information. We compared that answer when we annualized it to a rule of thumb that AOPA, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that organization or not, but it's Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. And they years ago came up with this ratio that about of the itinerant, which are the non-training operations at an airport, about 30% of that itinerant traffic is usually visiting or transient in nature. So we calculated that estimate for each airport and compared it to that bottom-up number that we got from each airport. We went back and forth with Grayson and his staff with their familiarity of all of these airports and came up with what we thought was a realistic estimate of general aviation visiting aircraft for each airport, and then translated that into visitors. And just to let you know, when those estimates were prepared, they were actually sent back to the airports for them to review before we used them in the study. In fact, all of the direct estimates, airport tenants, airport management, visitor, capital expending, we actually went through a process where once we had the direct numbers estimated for each airport, those were sent to the airport so that they could review and comment on those before we continued using them in the study. But from the work that we did, we estimated that there are about 440,000 people that arrive in Oklahoma each year that are a visitor to the state. Now, some of those people are not here very long. They may buy fuel and be gone again, but others come in, they spend the night, they have hotels, they have recreational or retail spending or whatever. So what we concluded from the information that we had, and we did surveys, we provided surveys to every airport and every fixed base operator in the state that they could hand out to visitors that came in so that we could collect data specifically about, who was just with the percent of people that were coming just for the day, the percent that were spending the night, and then for those that spend the night, are they here for leisure? Are they here for business? How long do they stay and how much do they spend? So that we actually had ratios by different types of airports around the state, what that visitor spending on an airport basis would be. And the general aviation visitors, when they come into the state, and this is not the multiplied number, but the amount of money that they're actually spending is about $160 million a year. So similar to what we do with construction spending, once we know how much is being spent, we can use the in-plan model then to work that backwards to figure out how many jobs that spending supports and what the payroll would be that's associated with those jobs. When you get into the visitor spending category, the jobs are typically not very high paying. Your jobs in aviation and aerospace are probably some of the highest paying jobs in the state. I mean, it wasn't uncommon for us to find average annual salary that was, close to $80,000 a year for some of these companies. But the people whose jobs are supported by visitor spending, hotel workers, restaurant workers, people who worked the game last night, for the people who may have flown in, and I'm sure there were some to see the game last night. So they're not usually high-paying jobs, but they still, help contribute to the economy. And it's the same with commercial visitors, people who fly to the state, who arrive here on a commercial airline flight. It's a lot easier for us to quantify this because each year, each airport, actually they do it on a monthly basis, they report how many boarding passengers or enplanements they have. The United States Department of Transportation, USDOT, has records that they've kept ever since there's been commercial air travel. And they have something called the 10% ticket sample. And they track for each airport in the country what percent of their enplanements, boarding passengers, are a resident of the area versus a visitor to the area. So for your state as a whole, about 43% of all the people who arrive here on a commercial airline flight, they're a visitor. The rest of them are residents of the state who are using the commercial airports. So when those visitors are in the state, again, they have a tremendous amount of spending. For hotels, they almost all, it's less than 0.5% who come in only for the day and go out again. So they're having hotel spending, food, rental car, different things that help contribute economically. And the commercial visitors, as we said before, spend about $2.2 billion in the state each year. The majority of them are business travelers. Not a lot, some leisure travelers, but the percent, it's really skewed to the business traveler who comes to the state. And they spend, a considerable amount of money usually when they're here, which is, definitely good for your economy. So the process, again, just to kind of walk back through it just briefly, we start with those direct impacts. Everything that we survey, everything that we collect. Let me go back to this commercial visitor spending. I got to give a shout out to both Tulsa and Oklahoma City. We had, I don't know, I'm going to say almost 4,000 completed visitor surveys from the people who come in on a commercial airline flight. So we had terrific data about why they were coming, how long they were staying, how much they were spending. Oklahoma City was actually able to put the survey up that when you logged in to use their free Wi-Fi, you couldn't get there until you went to the survey, which is how we would prefer that this always be done, because then we've got a captive audience. Tulsa was not able to do that with their provider, but they graciously used all of their airport volunteers that they have, and they did passenger intercept surveys for us, which are even better because when somebody logs on, and they see they have to do the survey, sometimes they just put nasty comments and get back out again. When some nice gray-haired person walks up to you at the airport and says, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, and I need to know," they tell you. And they give us really good, detailed information, good information that's not probably, likely to be as skewed or crazy as some of the online answers we get. So both Tulsa.
Didn't they, I thought you told me they started out when they approached the passenger, said, "Do you want your baggage?"
You know what
But American wouldn't go along with it. So, no, we got to give our passengers their baggage. They paid for it, so.
I'm embarrassed to say this, but yesterday when I got here, I was so busy, I was in the middle of something, and I got off the rental car bus and forgot my suitcase. I got over to get my car, and I'm thinking, I'm missing something. I go, "Oh, yeah, my suitcase is on the bus." They were so nice. They were so nice about helping me get it back. They laughed at me. They said I was the first one yesterday that did that, but somebody does it every day, so.
I'm sure.
I was memorable yesterday to them. So anyway, the numbers that we have for commercial visitor spending, we wouldn't have as great a data if it hadn't been for your two large airports. So the process, once we have all these direct impacts, then we go through, and I hate to refer to it as a black box, but to some extent, it is so complicated that, to accurately explain it, we would all be cross-eyed. Each one of the impacts, whether it's employment, payroll, or spending, depending upon if it's management, tenant, construction, or visitor, goes into a different portion of this model. So sometimes when you hear people talk about these, people say the multiplier. There are thousands of multipliers that are considered to develop the answer that, we have reflected in your study because it's specific to each segment, it's specific to whether it's employment, it's specific to whether it's payroll. So it's a really, really complex process. But what we did in your study, aside from using this in-plan model that we thought was the best, that would give us the best results because it's built specifically on data that's associated with each one of your counties. So it gives us a better answer. So in other words, think of it like this. If you're in one of the rural counties of Oklahoma, your opportunity to buy what you need there as a business is not always that great. You may need to go elsewhere to Tulsa or Oklahoma to buy what it is that you need. You can't buy it locally, but you can still buy it in the state of Oklahoma. So what that model helps us to understand is, what's the opportunity to buy in a rural county versus your metropolitan counties, and then those answers get added together so that you have a larger number that reflects economic activity throughout the whole state. But the way that this is actually built is that each county has its own multipliers in this grand scheme of things, and all of those then added together come up with your state number. I mentioned that. Oh, I think we're missing a slide. Oh, well. I mentioned that one of the things that we did do was going back to the bus company again, and that example, was that we actually did consider all of the other businesses or jobs in the state that really don't have anything to do per se with aviation, and how many employees there are at those businesses that in some way benefit. Now, their job is not aviation dependent. That's not what we're trying to say. They only may fly 3 or 4 times a month, but their job requires travel by air, or they use just-in-time shipping, or they have to have cargo that brings them supplies, or, I'm sure American Airlines has, suppliers that ship things in by air all the time that are off airport, and they're really freight forwarders. They're not necessarily aviation businesses. So again, through the modeling that we were able to do, there are almost another 35,000 jobs in the state that in some way, shape, or form, let's just say on a monthly basis, maybe not a weekly basis, but at least on a monthly basis, their job benefits or they gain efficiency from using aviation. So when we add up all the jobs that the airports support, the military jobs, the off-airport aviation and aerospace businesses, and then these other jobs, it's almost about, it's about 14.5% of all the employment in the state. In some way, you can tie it back to the aviation and aerospace industry and the operation of the airspace and the airports in the state. So it's a pretty significant number. One other thing that we did as part of this study was to estimate how much tax revenue is being contributed on both a local and a state level by the airports and the activities they support.
And this is just airports, correct?
This is just airports.
Not the rest of aviation
No,
and
it's
aerospace.
correct. This is just the airports, and it's only calculated on the direct impacts, not the other spin-off multiplier, just on the direct. So if you included those, which we don't, don't want to estimate the answer, so we only limit it to the direct impacts. We try to be conservative in a lot of this because the bigger the number gets, the harder people have a time sometimes believing it. So we were as conservative as we can. And I think we did lose numbers on this, didn't we? The total is about $500 million each year that airports and aviation activities generate in terms of local and state tax revenues. And here, the pies are up there, but I don't know what the numbers are because they fell off again because of this stupid PowerPoint difficulty. But the taxes come from the following. If you're an employee, that your job is a direct job supported by one of those 5 categories that we talked about. You live in Oklahoma, part of your paycheck each year is spent on items that are taxable. You go to Walmart, you go to Costco, you go, whatever you're buying with the money that you earn, you're paying a sales tax on most of that. And so one of the contributors to this sales tax, or to the tax, this $500 million in taxes, is related to sales tax that's paid by people whose jobs are airport supported. Then we have sales tax that comes from airport spending on goods and materials to operate the airport, tenant spending for goods and materials to operate their business, minus those that are tax exempt. And then when construction material is built to implement the capital projects at airports, that's taxed. So there are more sales tax related to airport operations, tenant spending, and construction impacts. Then the biggest category are the taxes that are paid on visitor spending. Since you guys are residents, you don't check your hotel bill here, but I'll tell you, you collect, there are taxes at different levels depending on what the community is. Local lodging taxes that get entered into this. Yes?
Why didn't you include property tax?
That's one thing that we didn't include. We could have, and we didn't do it in this one. It's not, we've done it other places. Amazingly, it's not as high as you might think it would be. It's harder to do because we don't know necessarily where the people live. We could do, I think it's usually about.
It's pretty simple on airport tenants.
Oh,
ad valorem
are you
tax.
talking, I thought you were talking about the property tax paid by the workers whose job, like on their
No.
homes or whatever.
If you're talking about import-related, airport-related tax revenue.
Well, does like American pay a property tax based on their, because usually those things are not taxed.
Well, all these aviation companies pay property tax. They
Is it a
may-
property tax or
They
a
may
business?
ad valorem tax, or they may pay personal property tax.
Well, we did not calculate that. I'm not sure I'm familiar with, I don't know. No, I know we didn't calculate it.
Obviously, the airport itself doesn't, the trust, the airport authority, but
Are they
I don't
really,
know about,
so they pay property tax? Usually at an airport,
they're exempt.
they're exempt, yeah. Not always.
No.
And certainly probably not, you're not publicly owned.
Oh, are you
so-
exempt? They may not be paying tax on their building because their building
were
in
good at
effect
that.
is leased from an airport trust authority.
Right,
But
and
they have
that,
personal property
that
tax.
Personal
benefit,
property, certainly,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, we, you know,
even if you're tax exempt because you're
you
leasing
can put that down
a
for the next
publicly
step.
owned building, you're
We'll,
paying personal property tax. And that's a significant figure.
It's a good, I know that for Monroney doesn't because
They're a gov-
it's a US
yeah.
government entity, but AAR may. I don't, real property tax.
Yeah.
Obviously, they pay a personal property tax on their equipment, so forth, and other personal type assets, but. why
That
not?
might
We'll
be,
find that
I
out.
don't know. I can ask John Chappie at Commerce.
Okay. One
Because-
other question
Yeah,
is you
sure.
have airport-related tax revenue. You said you're undertaking a study in South Carolina?
Yes, mm-hmm.
Transpark, Transport, their big
That's-
airport, where Boeing located, for example.
Charleston.
In Charleston, yes.
If my memory serves me correct, they receive a tremendous amount of state aid
900 million.
every year.
Oh, no, not every year. Not that, that was the initial incentive
Well, their
package.
fire department in the past was paid for by state government and some of their operations costs.
Yeah.
I mean, so that was one of several airports in that state that received direct state revenue
Mhm.
for operations.
North Carolina's
Not just
got
runway
some-
development.
Yeah.
So.
Well,
for
the runway
Oklahoma
at
to
that
compete-
airport is actually, Charleston Air Force Base is also there. So
Mm-hmm.
the military actually owns the runway at that
Sure.
airport. They actually maintain it.
Right.
The civilian airport doesn't even maintain that runway. Some of this, I mean, and these are all great points. I mean, some of it gets so, it's hard to, separate it all out, but you're right. Boeing got a significant tax incentive from the state of South Carolina. Now, what the source of all that
Well, as
money
they
was.
did in Oklahoma.
Yeah, well, they do a lot of places. But, when you see that you're getting back, however many billions of dollars each year in return for some of that investment. So you have to, if you did it every year, I mean, that's like subsidizing an airline. If you have to spend it, year after year after year, then you question whether it's, it's worth
And
it.
the point you may be, I think, driving at, Mr. Chairman, and it's certainly in both South Carolina and North Carolina. Like, our peers there made significant investments, were able to make significant investments because of their revenue to help land the Boeing project in South Carolina and to help land Honda Jet in North Carolina. We're asked many times but we can't make those kinds of investments because we don't have
The
that
point is
funding.
Oklahoma, Aviation Aerospace is second largest employer and has second largest economic impact
Yep.
of any industry sector in Oklahoma. On the other hand, the assistance that is received from the state pales in comparison to other states. Where, in the Carolinas, for example, aerospace doesn't rank as high as an
No, not
economic
nearly as
impact.
high, no.
But what the state supports in aerospace and aviation is significant higher than
But
what
most,
happens
most of,
here.
I mean, you know, if the number was, and I've never been able to find out, you know, document
Point
for
is,
sure,
It's
but,
a heck of a bargain to
but-
Oklahoma.
right, but the 900 million, none of that came from VIX, you know, the Aeronautics Commission in South Carolina.
Yeah.
It came from economic development and, you know, Department of, you know,
Some
Came
of
from
other
the
big
state.
state
It
agencies.
doesn't
Yeah,
have
for the
to be-
Boeing
The
incentive, some of the
state is the
investment
state,
in
no
the.
matter what agency.
Right, well, yeah, it's somebody's paying for it, just like there is no free college. Somebody's paying for it. So-
Any other questions?
Well, we hope that you get, you know, good use out of the study. It's like, you know, it is a snapshot, and it sounds like from the report earlier today that it's only getting better and not getting worse, and that's a good thing. And, you know, we hope that the airports will be able to, you know, use it to their advantage, because that, you know, we do it a lot for them, because people in small communities just really have no concept of what a lot of these airports are doing economically in the community.
Barb, I have a quick question.
Yes.
Is there any way to get some distilled numbers for the local, maybe in our districts?
Good question.
Like, let's say Durant for a change, not Durant, but Durant. I'm not a native.
Obviously, you're not running for office.
Yes, we have all of that information. I'll tell you, there are a couple things. First of all, we did a report for each state elected official for their district that showed, you know, distilled the economic impact of just the airports that serve their district, so they have that. We have, each airport got an individual report on their activities, and, you know, not only, I mean, one of the things that we spent a lot of time on is not only just quantifying these numbers, but talking about how hospitals use the airports, how fly-in physicians use the airport, you know, how does the airport benefit the agricultural industry? So we have a lot of, you know, more like human interest stories in these individual reports. So I'm sure that we could work together to, you know, for the airports that are in your district, we could get you a compendium of all those individual reports so that you'd have all of that data for your airport, rather than having to go through that big airports, rather than having to
What-
go through the.
That's on the website.
It is, what I don't believe, so all your airports are already on our website, Commissioner Conway. And we could, if you want those in paper, you know, that's how I like things, but I'm ancient. So, but what it will not have, what I don't believe we do have is like off-airport aviation aerospace in
That's not by
Durant.
airport, that's not, the only way we have the off-airport stuff broken out, because we had such a high concentration in the Tulsa and Oklahoma City metro areas. We have two numbers for the big metro areas, and then we have another statewide number. I don't have the data. Commerce would have it, that we
Yeah,
could maybe
yeah.
peel back to get individual off-airport stuff, but that's not presented like that in the
Okay.
report.
I mean, Commerce has got certain things by company, business, that we, and I don't want it, frankly, because if it comes to us in a written form,
Then you have to
we are subject to the Open Records Act in that regard, where Commerce has an exemption. So some of those companies would be upset, and they wouldn't be as forthcoming for these type of surveys the next time around, for either Commerce or us in a study like this. A footnote, if I could, Mr. Chairman, over 7,000 man-hours represented in this study, the most comprehensive study ever of the aviation and aerospace industry in Oklahoma. And you notice we've continued to say that. That's something I've been trying to do for 15 years. This measured everything that had to do with something that had wings, you know, as I believe it should. That's aviation and aerospace in this state. And altogether, these three components, it's very big. And that's the way I've always felt like it should be measured, because it's total economic impact of anything that has to do with aircraft and manufacturing parts and MRO and military aviation, but all that's about aviation. We wouldn't have been able to do what we did without some incredible partners. FAA was a big one. These things are not cheap, but the last $50,000 provided for this study came from the Oklahoma City Airport Authority, $25,000 came from the Tulsa Airport Authority and the Tulsa Chamber, each contributing $12,500. That's what allowed us to capture, to do the good work we did insofar as off-airport. And let's face it, Boeing's not on airport, Northrop Grumman's not on airport, NORDAM's not on airport, flight safety's not on airport. This would not have been a complete picture without us capturing that. And I really appreciate you all for voting to do it some time ago now. Your predecessor, Secretary Patterson, Secretary Ridley, for giving me the green light, knowing that it would be useful. Yes, I thank the governor, and I know that Secretary Snodgrass and Commerce have already found it very useful, what we have here, what we have to build upon. And one thing I don't think you got to mention, Barb, and I guess we got this from Commerce, that the average salary is $73,300 in aviation and aerospace, and that puts us way up the food
Yeah.
chain.
Yeah, those off-airport jobs that are in that aviation, they're very high-paying jobs.
Yeah, they brought it up a great deal. So it really is great news, and I do think, I can tell most of us have been around. The last oil bust was pretty tough on Oklahoma in the 1980s. We had T-shirts that said, "Will the last one to leave the state of Oklahoma please turn out the lights?" Do you remember those T-shirts? That's when I came to work in state government in the Attorney General's office. In my first month, I got furloughed. You probably might remember that, Secretary Patterson. But we didn't have as robust an aviation and aerospace. And even though our good friend oil and gas, where business aviation began, and it began in Oklahoma, I might add, they've suffered a downturn here as of late. But I think this time around, I don't think it was the same. We weathered it pretty well because we are diversified. Not perfectly, but we are diversified, and I think we're a big part of that, and we should be proud of that.
All right, any other questions? Thank you, Barb.
Thank you, Barb.
Let's proceed. Item number 7, UPS 3-year capital improvement program.
Thank you, Commissioner. On that
Grayson?
last item, this is the quad-fold brochure that each airport should have online, and we know they printed it out, and I'll make myself available. I've been doing some speaking events, went to the Enid City Council, Norman Chamber. Next week, we're going to Stillwater City Council. If you all want me to come talk to any of your Rotary clubs, city council meetings, et cetera, certainly be happy to do so.
It's the Spread the Good News Tour, and
That's right.
Grayson's enlisted in that.
I have enlisted. Item number 7, 3-year capital improvement program. This is a new project. David J. Perry called about a month and a half ago. They've had several lighting issues over the last 2 to 3 years, individual light circuits going out. And so they had put a new runway lighting project on their ACIP to use Federal Aviation Administration funds, the non-primary entitlement funds that they get. Unfortunately, about a month and a half ago, the lighting system went kaput, and they had the electricians out, several electricians out to look at the system, and basically they said you have multiple failures in multiple parts of the system, and it would not be a wise investment to repair the system as is. So you guys are either just gonna have to be without lights until the FAA money shows up, or you're gonna have to spend a lot of money to repair the system. The city then came to us and said, is there any way Aeronautics can help out? So what we're presenting to you today is an opportunity to pay for the project up front with state monies so we can get the project underway now, because right now the airport is basically VFR daytime only. And then when FAA money becomes available, probably in the August, September timeframe, we'll get reimbursed the money from that FAA non-primary entitlement dollars. Staff's recommending approval for this project. It's gonna cost about $350,000. And we'd like approval to enter into an intergovernmental agreement which would reflect the reimbursement of those FAA NPE dollars once they become available. Hopefully they'll become available sooner rather than later, but since we're in a continuing resolution cycle, and you never really know how the continuing resolution cycle is gonna happen with all the debates with FAA and ATC privatization going on, so, but we should have money probably August, September at the latest for this project. I'll stand for questions.
All right. Chair will entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve as requested by the staff.
Second.
There's motion second. Any questions? Call the roll, please.
Vice Chair Conway,
Aye.
Secretary Potter,
Aye.
Commissioner Putnam,
Aye.
Commissioner Amos,
Aye.
Commissioner Hunter,
Aye.
Commissioner Ray,
Aye.
Chairman Stuckey.
Aye. So ordered.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Item number 8 is capital improvement grant program. Dale?
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Secretary.
This
Chairman
is a
Stuckey,
consent
Commissioners.
docket for all of these,
Yes, sir.
and if you don't, if you wish to, we can pull any item off the consent docket. Otherwise, we will consider them all together.
Thank you. I have 6 items for your consideration this morning. The first one is an amendment to the state grant for the Claremore Regional Airport. That project's going to be reconstructed. Basically, what they'll do is grind up the existing asphalt, recompact it, and put new asphalt on top of it. Then also just do a crack seal out on the connecting taxiways. The reason this is an amendment, that project has been granted. Due to the delay in getting the FAA funds to the city did not sign the contract with the contractor before the 90-day deadline, and the contractor walked away, so we had to rebid it. And so we've rebid it with a new contractor, new numbers. Total cost of the project is about $100,000 more than the first bid. Total project cost is just under $2.4 million. Federal funds is a little over $2.1 million. State grant funds is $118,731. Local match is $120,232. The commission is providing half the local match to the federal funds. The next item is for the grant at Goldsby. As Grayson just mentioned, we're trying to expedite and get the lights back on there, so this approval is contingent upon receiving the intergovernmental agreement and then also receiving a grant application based on bids, and it is to relight the primary runway there. Total cost is estimated at this time at $350,000. We'll be funding 90% at this time, and the local match will be about $35,000, and then as Grayson indicated, once federal funds become available, we'll be completely reimbursed our total share. So the state eventually will not have any matching funds in this project at all. The next item is for an amendment to the state grant at the Miami Regional Airport. It's basically a little change order. We're constructing a hard stand up there. On these small little projects like this, we typically don't do the geotech work because it costs $3,000 to do geotech out there. It's a small area. When during the construction, they ran in some muck excavation, so they had to do a little bit more excavation than what they thought, and then additional pavement. The total cost for that change order or amendment to the grant is $8,804, and the state's paying, will pay 95% of that, about $8,363. The local match is $441. Next item is for a construction of a hard stand at Muskogee Davis Field Airport. Total project cost is estimated to be $190,000. The state will be funding about $180,500. Local match is $9,500. This project is, the approval will be contingent upon receiving a grant based on bids also. And the next item is at Sand Springs, William R. Pogue. This is also for a hard stand on the main terminal apron. As you know, we're doing this because the existing asphalt is in poor condition. We don't have the money to do the whole apron, so we're doing hard stands. Total cost of this apron is estimated to be $175,000. State share is $166,250. Local match is $8,750. This approval is also contingent upon receiving a grant based on bids. Both these airports, I believe, had gone to bid, and they'll be opening in the next few days. And so we're going ahead to recommend approval at this time for the grant. The final project is for the Woodward primary runway, concrete runway, and then also portions of the taxiway that are also concrete. This is basically go out there and remove and replace some panels, do the reconstruct some corner breaks, put in new joint seal, seal cracks. This is a state-only project. Total cost is estimated to be about $781,000. State share is $742,330. Local match is $39,070, and staff recommends approval on the above. Any questions?
Any commissioner wish to discuss any or remove any specific item? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please.
Vice Chair Conway,
Aye.
Secretary Potter,
Aye.
Commissioner Putnam,
Aye.
Commissioner Amos,
Aye.
Commissioner Hunter,
Aye.
Commissioner Ray,
Aye.
Chairman Stuckey.
Aye, so ordered.
Thank you.
Item 9, Oklahoma Airport System, Grayson.
Commissioners, if you'll scratch the memory bank, you'll remember back to, I believe it was 2011, that we did our last system plan review. Looking to maybe take some airports out of the system, change the designations of a couple airports. In 2011, based upon the outgoing or outpouring of support from the local community in Laverne, we decided to keep Laverne in the system, contingent upon them being able to acquire the land. The city actually didn't own the land that the airport was located on. It was on a long-term lease. The lease actually expired last summer, and based upon the court case that was ongoing to determine what the value of the property was, the judge came out with a ruling, and the judge approved the appraiser's estimate for the cost of the property, and the city came to the conclusion that they could not afford to buy the necessary property, and as such, they have requested that the airport be removed from the system so that the airport can go back to being the landowners and change the designation from public use to private use. I believe in your tab, you'll see the letter of request from the mayor of Laverne. Honestly, I was a little surprised. I've been talking with the airport for about the last 2 years on, here's the property you need to buy, here's the process to go through it. But when the appraiser's report came back, and given Laverne is a pretty small town, they just realized they couldn't acquire the property at the price, given the lack of use of the airport, the fact that they really only have the one tenant, which is an ag springer. So with that being said, what we're presenting to you today and requesting electronics.
They only last so long.
Only last so long, that's right.
Did you cover they're going to Buffalo? Yeah, put that in.
Test. Okay. It is likely that the Ag Sprayer will be moving to Buffalo Municipal Airport, which is the next nearest airport. They are a NIPIAS airport, which, as you know, Laverne's not. Laverne is a state-only airport in the OASP. But Buffalo is a state airport and a NIPIAS airport, and they receive federal funding, the $150,000 of non-primary entitlement funds each year from the FAA. So with that being said, staff is recommending that we move into the public comment phase. We'll put the request for comments in a couple of local newspapers and hopefully come back to you at the January meeting for final action on this item. And then I told Laverne that they don't need to come to both meetings, that if they were going to come to one meeting, it would probably be the January meeting. So I expect to see either the mayor or maybe the airport board chairman, who's really been kind of the point of contact on this particular issue. That being said, I will stand for questions.
So the action today is just to approve proceeding with the process.
That is correct.
Have any comments, Commissioner Ray?
Who owns that? I mean, is it one of the tenants that owns the land in Laverne?
No, it's not one of the tenants. I don't know the name offhand. I'd have to go read the court docket.
Will it remain an airport?
It will remain a private use airport. Originally, the landowner wanted the airport to be closed, but now it seems like the landowner might want to remain it as a private use airport for potential future use by themselves, with themselves only.
Well, isn't that preferred by the city? That way they get the benefit of it, but they don't have to pay a dime to subsidize it?
I would assume so, but I can't say for certain.
If they let other people use it.
Right.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for further information
We
next
asked,
meeting.
we asked Jane Giroux to get involved, but it's been too long since she lived there, so.
Do I hear a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have motion and second to proceed with the process. Any questions? Call the roll, please.
Vice Chair Conway,
Aye.
Secretary Potter,
Aye.
Commissioner Putnam,
Aye.
Commissioner Amos,
Aye.
Commissioner Hunter,
Aye.
Commissioner Ray,
Aye.
Chairman Stuckey.
Aye, so ordered.
Thank you.
Item 9, approval of $750 to the
You can have a say.
Airport Operators Association for Women in Aviation, which is this Saturday, right?
Can you move that slide back? Sorry, I advanced it too many times.
Oh, God, don't ask me.
Morning, Commissioners. How is everyone? The Oklahoma Airport Operators, with assistance with the Oklahoma Aeronautics Commission, has planned an event that will be at the Atlantic Aviation Hangar. Thank you so much, Commissioner Putnam and Commissioner Amos, for signing up for tickets. The Oklahoma Aeronautics Commission, we are asking for a $750 sponsorship, and that's an action required. Is that on the agenda?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know why that's,
It better be.
I hope so. Okay, all right. Christy Slater could not be here today, but she wanted to thank you so much for your support. And just wanted you to know that the Oklahoma Aeronautics Commission has only been in a support role, and this is actually an Oklahoma Airport Operators Association event. And the fundraising that they have done for this event has been through their association. It has not been through the agency. And the ticket sales have not gone through the agency either. So I'm requesting the commission to give them $750 in a sponsorship and would appreciate your consideration. I'll stand for questions.
I hear a motion.
I so move that we approve.
Second.
We have motion second. Call the roll, please.
Vice Chair Conway,
Aye.
Secretary Potter,
Aye.
Commissioner Putnam,
Aye.
Commissioner Amos,
Aye.
Commissioner Hunter,
Aye.
Commissioner Ray,
Aye.
Chairman Stuckey.
Aye, so ordered.
Sandra,
Item 11,
footnote, Mr. Chairman, Sandra's probably being a little modest. This was, I'd say she was the original inspiration for this it was a bill. I mean, we have this day in statute. If you can correct me if I'm wrong, Sandra.
That's correct.
And I think she arranged for some of the artwork and the Pearl Carter Scott contributions. So we've been involved, but it's going to be an OAOA, hopefully the 99s, the Women in Aviation, et cetera. It's something to be proud of. We've had a number of women who have made meritorious achievements in aviation in Oklahoma. And so we want to recognize them, and that continues to this very day with, for example, Meredith Siegfried being the CEO and president of NORDAM.
item 11, commission meetings.
Okay, Commissioners, don't be mad at me, but these are the dates. We've looked into the crystal ball and to the calendar and to the director's calendar and hopefully all of your calendars and Secretary Patterson's calendar. And
Governor's cabinet
everybody's
meetings.
calendar.
Except for ours.
Except for yours. And I can't, I don't have access to that on your computer, Commissioner Amos. But these are our suggested dates for the 2018 commission meetings. We are required to report these by December 15th. And would love for you to consider these dates, moving it back to Thursday so that Secretary Patterson can attend. And Secretary Patterson, I've spoken to your assistant, and she has assured me that it's okay. So,
All right, do
would
we
love
hear
your
a motion?
consideration, and
Motion to
I'll
approve.
stand for questions.
Second,
Second.
Ray, second. Call the roll, please.
Vice Chair Conway,
Aye.
Secretary Potter,
Aye.
Commissioner Putnam,
Aye.
Commissioner Amos,
Aye.
Commissioner Hunter,
Aye.
Commissioner Ray,
Aye.
Chairman Stuckey.
Aye, so ordered. Item 12, events.
Okay, in your packets, in your pocket, in your folder, you'll have a list of events here, and you can go through that. Wanted to highlight just a few things. Of course, Director was talking about women in aviation, And December 9th is officially Oklahoma Aviation and Aerospace Day for Women. That is Pearl Carter Scott's birthday. Pearl Carter Scott was a famous Oklahoma female aviator that began to fly at the age of 13 with Wiley Post. She's from Marlow, Oklahoma, and Senator Paul Scott was our champion author on that, and Representative Biggs in the House. And we are so pleased to have that, and to have that forever in statute. And I will tell you that we've had a state contact us about how we were able to accomplish this over in Washington. And we are starting to see some of our innovations being emulated by other states, which is really nice to have that kind of praise from other states. And we also have August 19th in conjunction with National Aviation Day will be Oklahoma Aviation Day. So the Women in Aviation Day event, I just wanted to point just a few things out. Atlantic Aviation over at Wiley Post has been amazing, and they have opened their doors to us, and they've just been incredible. Erin Chappell is going to be our keynote speaker, and she is an author and a pilot, and she writes books about aviation for, I believe, young people. Hopefully, I've not read her book, so I hope it's okay. But we'll see. I wanted to also say that Delta Consulting, OAOA has told me, was the very first to sign up to sponsor, so we appreciate that. And American Airlines is one of their sponsors, Garver, KSA, CP&Y, the Williams Companies, Lochner. So those are all wonderful community partners in this event, and we thank them so much for their support. We have about 110 so far attending, and tickets closed today. Commissioners, if any of you would like to come, Secretary Patterson, would love to have you as a guest. If you would like to come, let us know. It's this Saturday from 10 to noon at Wiley Post Atlantic Hangar. And my second item on the list, the aviation license plate. We have sold 74 license plates. It's not amazing, but it is well towards 100, which is what we need. And we have not really begun to work that on social media yet, so I expect to be pursuing that as we reach our 180-day goal to have 100 license plates before they go into effect. And the third item I have for you, let's see. Oh, the Aviation Art Contest deadline is January 19th. Commissioner Ray, I'm going to send some of these home for you to take to the school there in Guyman. This is our brand new calendar. It's in the back of your packet. And I would like to thank Secretary Patterson for ODOT printing this for us. Kevin Lowe and his staff, and Dan Tigert, their new graphics arts designer. Just incredible work, helped me and nurtured me through this process, and these calendars we're just so proud of them and for the students and the work that they've done. And you can see here, OAC is right here, right there. Can you see on the cover? No. Okay. Anyway.
Saves us a great deal of money.
Yes.
Thank you,
yes.
Secretary Patterson.
Thank you so much, Secretary Patterson. These are mailed out to all the schools, 2,200 schools throughout the state. Receive 3 copies to the principals and the superintendents. And as you remember, last year we had over 1,100 entries versus the 130 that we had the year before. So hopefully we will have more entries than ever. Jim Gardner has confirmed with us that he is going to be one of our guest judges again. And also we have secured John Kelty from Tinker Air Force Base. What's his rank, Director? Do you know? Yes.
Well, there, Senator, thank you. One of 28,000 people out there. I
Yes,
just
so
didn't know.
John Kelty is going to be our keynote speaker. He's confirmed with us too. We'd love to have you that day as well in the Governor's Blue Room. Flight Bites has over 5,000 subscribers. Commissioners, we're asking you that if you would please forward Flight Bites. I know you're reading them every time you get them on Wednesdays, and they're not going to your spam box. And so we would ask that you would help us get subscribers to Flight Bites. And other states are also watching Flight Bites. We have several people that have reached out to us from other states. Catherine told me when they went to Niseo that several people commented on Flight Bites, and so hopefully those were positive comments. So I would stand for questions about any of these items.
Questions? Vic, do you have any closing items?
No, I just know that Commissioners Putnam and Hunter, they also have an event coming up, Experimental Aircraft Association event at Sundance on the 16th. Would either of you like to say anything about that?
We've had some logistics problems. I'll have to check on it. I wish I could be more enthusiastic at this point, but
I don't have any insight, you don't, you'd be without the answers.
Any other items?
Air
come-
Force people should be able to help you with logistics.
yeah, they like to be on orders.
Next meeting of the commission will be January 11, 10 o'clock here. We are adjourned.